The training field of Fort Haverly was alive with noise that morning. Rows of recruits jogged in cadence, their boots striking the ground like a drumline of discipline, while instructors barked orders sharp enough to cut the air. In the distance, at the far end of the compound, a firing range stretched beneath the August sun. Targets lined up in neat rows, cardboard silhouettes waiting to be punctured by controlled bursts of steel-jacketed precision. It was here, among the crack of rifles and the low thud of heavier weapons, that an unusual visitor stood out. She was not dressed in fatigues or a service uniform but in a plain denim jacket and worn boots, her hair tied back without a hint of military polish. Her name was Evelyn Carter, though everyone called her Eve. To most in the camp, she looked like just another civilian, one of the countless who lived outside the fence and occasionally wandered in on business. She carried herself with the calm ease of someone accustomed to being underestimated, but the colonel running the base that day noticed her presence with immediate irritation. Colonel Braddock was a man carved from regulations and pride, the kind of officer who believed that rank automatically equaled superiority. His chest bore ribbons from conflicts stretching back 2 decades, and his booming voice often filled the range with lectures about discipline and the standards of warriors. When he saw Eve lingering near the benches, watching the Navy SEALs preparing for their next shooting drill, he raised an eyebrow that carried both suspicion and disdain. "Ma'am," he called, striding toward her with his hat angled like a shield. "This is a restricted range. Civilians aren't permitted without clearance. What's your business here?" His tone wasn't curious, it was accusatory, as though she had already trespassed on his sense of order. Eve met his stare without flinching. "I was told this was where the best shooters in the country train," she said simply, her voice low and even. "I was hoping to try a round myself if you'd allow it." The surrounding SEALs, men hardened by years of grueling combat drills, paused mid-motion. A few chuckled under their breath, exchanging glances that dripped with amusement. One muttered, "What is this bring your wife to work day?" Another smirked openly, whispering about how she probably couldn't tell a safety from a trigger guard. Braddock let the corner of his mouth twist into a condescending smile. "You want to shoot here?" he asked, disbelief dripping from each syllable. "Lady, this isn't a carnival game booth. These men," he gestured at the SEALs tightening their vests, "have spent years mastering weapons most civilians can't even name. It isn't for hobbyists or simple requests." His chuckle was low, dismissive, designed to draw laughter from the men behind him. And it did. But Eve didn't shrink under their amusement. She slipped her hands into her jacket pockets, her eyes scanning the line of rifles laid out on the bench as if she were choosing fruit at a market. "I understand," she said, calm as ever. "Still, I'd like the chance. 1 target, 1 round, just for the experience." That unwavering tone caught a few SEALs off guard. They expected nervousness, an apology, maybe even a retreat. Instead, her request sat heavy in the silence until Braddock barked out a laugh. "1 round? That's rich. Fine, if you're so eager to embarrass yourself, I'll allow it. Boys, give her a rifle." He didn't say it to honor her request, he said it to set up her humiliation. Nothing pleased a man like Braddock more than proving a civilian's incompetence in front of his hardened operators. The SEALs, now openly entertained, grabbed a standard-issue M4 from the rack and handed it over with exaggerated care, as if they were giving a priceless artifact to a child who might drop it. Eve took it with surprising steadiness, her fingers sliding along the receiver with unconscious familiarity. She checked the chamber, flicked the safety, and brought the weapon up with a smoothness that turned a few smiles into frowns. Still, Braddock folded his arms across his chest, convinced her stance meant nothing. "Target at 300 meters, he ordered, pointing at a distant silhouette. "Let's see if you can even hit the dirt around it." Eve didn't answer. She settled her cheek against the stock, closed one eye, and exhaled. The field seemed to still around her, the chatter and footsteps of soldiers fading into background haze. Her finger rested on the trigger, not tense, not eager, just ready. Then came the crack. The rifle bucked against her shoulder once, sharply, precisely. The sound was swallowed by the sky, leaving behind a thin wisp of smoke. Across the range, at exactly 300 meters, the target's head snapped as the round punched clean through the bullseye. Dead center. The silence that followed was different this time, thicker, heavier, colored not with laughter but with disbelief. Braddock's jaw tensed. He stepped forward, squinting as if his eyes might lie to him. But the hole was there, perfectly drilled into the heart of the target, undeniable. A few SEALs muttered curses under their breath, others raised eyebrows, and one let out a low whistle. Eve lowered the rifle, set it gently back on the bench, and turned to the colonel. "Thank you for the chance," she said, not a trace of arrogance in her tone, only quiet respect. Then, as casually as if she had just tied her shoes, she added, "May I try a few more?" Braddock's first instinct was to deny her request. His pride was already bruised by the single shot she had landed, and the murmurs from his SEALs gnawed at his authority. To let her continue was to risk more humiliation. But then he noticed the looks on the men's faces. Their smirks had turned into something closer to curiosity, even respect. He couldn't afford that. To crush the woman's momentum, he needed to prove that her bullseye was nothing more than beginner's luck. "Fine," he said sharply, his voice cutting across the range. "A few more. But this time we'll make it fair. Not just one shot at 300. We'll run you through the drill these men train on every week. You think you can shoot? Prove it." His tone carried the confidence of a man certain that the next steps would expose her limits. The SEALs brightened, some grinning again at the thought of her stumbling under the pressure. Eve only nodded once, calm and unshaken. The drill was simple on paper, punishing in practice. Multiple targets were arranged at staggered distances, from 50 meters out to 600. The shooter had to engage them in sequence, each one requiring rapid adjustment of sight, stance, and breathing. The SEALs trained tirelessly to master it because it simulated real combat conditions, moving from close-quarter precision to long-distance shots in the span of seconds. Braddock motioned to one of his men. "Show her how it's done," he ordered. Petty Officer Ramirez stepped forward, his movements crisp, his posture radiating the confidence of experience. He shouldered his rifle, and within moments the range echoed with sharp cracks. Each target rang or tore in quick succession. 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, and finally 600 meters. By the end, Ramirez had landed all but one dead on. The men clapped shoulders and nodded approvingly. "That's what training looks like," Braddock announced loudly, making sure Eve heard every word. "Now your turn." Eve walked to the firing line without hesitation. She didn't boast, didn't even smile. She simply adjusted her jacket, checked the weapon's balance, and signaled she was ready. Braddock folded his arms and waited for the inevitable cracks in her composure. "Shooter ready," barked the range officer. "Targets live in 3, 2, 1. The buzzer sounded and Eve moved like water. The first target at 50 meters dropped instantly, the shot punching dead center before most of the men even registered her trigger squeeze. She pivoted to 100 meters, another bullseye. Her movements were fluid, her breathing unbroken, her transitions so natural that it was as if she'd been running this exact drill her whole life. 200 meters, center mass. 300, straight through the chest silhouette. 400, a perfect headshot that made one of the SEALs mutter, "No way," and then 600. She paused a heartbeat longer, adjusted her scope, exhaled and squeezed. The distant steel plate clanged, ringing like a church bell announcing her mastery. Every target, hit. Every shot, clean. For a long moment, the range was silent. The SEALs stood with expressions that swung between awe and disbelief. Even Ramirez, who had executed the drill flawlessly just minutes before, shook his head slowly with a grin that admitted what his pride would not say aloud. Braddock's face reddened. He opened his mouth, shut it again, then tried to recover his authority with bluster. "Lucky streak," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A couple of clean pulls don't mean anything. These men spend years training under real fire. Hitting cardboard is one thing, combat is another." His words hung in the air, flimsy against the truth they had all witnessed. Eve rested the rifle gently on the bench once more. She didn't argue, didn't gloat. Her silence was sharper than any retort. It left the SEALs to fill the void themselves, whispering among each other, curiosity rising with each glance in her direction. One of them, a tall operator with a scar running down his cheek, finally spoke up. "Colonel, what's her background?" His tone wasn't mocking, it was respectful, almost cautious. The colonel stiffened, unwilling to admit ignorance. He turned back to Eve. "Yes," he demanded. "What exactly is your experience? Don't tell me you picked this up on a farm with your daddy's hunting rifle." He expected a confession of mediocrity, something that would restore the imbalance. Eve tilted her head slightly, considering. "Experience?" she echoed softly. "Let's just say I've spent more time than I can count behind a barrel. Different weapons, different situations. Some formal, some not." She gave no more detail, and her restraint made the mystery grow heavier. The scarred SEAL studied her like a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. Braddock, however, scowled at the lack of specifics. "That's not an answer," he snapped. "Who trained you? What service? What branch?" He needed to pin her down, to classify her into something lesser than the men she just outperformed. But Eve only offered a faint smile and replied, "Does it matter?" The colonel's fists tightened behind his back. It mattered to him. It mattered because authority was slipping through his grasp like sand. The men weren't laughing anymore. They were watching her, not him, with the kind of quiet admiration that couldn't be commanded, only earned. Colonel Braddock couldn't let it end there. His pride was too deeply invested, his authority too publicly challenged. He cleared his throat, straightened his cap, and spoke with the kind of volume meant to drown out doubt. "Fine marksmanship," he conceded stiffly, "but there's more to shooting than lining up dots on a paper. Combat demands stress, pressure, movement. Let's see how you hold up when the conditions aren't so polite." He gestured toward a section of the range where obstacles loomed, wooden barricades, sandbag cover, and winding paths simulating urban combat scenarios. It was a course designed to exhaust even trained operators, combining sprints, reloads, and shots taken while under physical strain. "We'll run the CQB gauntlet," Braddock announced. "Timed. Moving targets. Full combat load." His words carried the satisfaction of a man sure he'd finally devised a challenge impossible for her to match. The SEALs exchanged glances. A few smirked again, reassured by the colonel's plan. Eve studied the course without visible concern. "All right," she said simply, adjusting the strap of her jacket. The ease in her voice needled Braddock, but he kept his composure. "Ramirez," he barked, "show her the standard." The petty officer nodded, snapped down his visor, and set off at a sprint. He weaved between barriers, ducking behind cover, firing controlled bursts at pop-up targets that appeared without warning. Each trigger pull was swift and decisive, his reload seamless. By the time he crossed the finish line, his chest was heaving with exertion, but his accuracy was above standard and his time respectable. The SEALs clapped their approval, proud of one of their own. Braddock smiled thinly. "That's efficiency under pressure. Now let's see how our guest fares." Eve walked calmly to the starting line. She didn't stretch, didn't bounce on her heels like the operators did before exertion. She just picked up the rifle, checked her magazine with a practiced hand, and nodded to the range officer. The buzzer screamed and she moved. Not with frantic speed, not with hesitation. Her pace was controlled, steady. Where Ramirez had charged, Eve flowed. She ducked behind the first barricade, leaned out, and dropped the target with a single shot. Moving forward, she never wasted energy, her steps economical, her rifle rising and falling as naturally as if it were an extension of her body. Each pop-up target lasted barely a second before collapsing under her fire. At one point she slid into prone position, dust clouding around her, and nailed a distant headshot with such ease that one of the SEALs swore aloud. By the time she crossed the finish line, her breathing was calm, her eyes clear, as though the course had been nothing more than a casual jog. The range officer called out the results. Every single target hit, and her time, shockingly, was faster than Ramirez's by a full 4 seconds. A ripple of disbelief tore through the gathered men. Some muttered about impossible reflexes, others craned to double-check the timer. Ramirez himself gave a low whistle, shaking his head with a rueful grin. "I don't know who you are, lady," he said, "but that was damn impressive." His sincerity made the silence heavier. Braddock's jaw worked furiously, though he forced his expression into one of rigid neutrality. Inside, however, his authority felt like a brittle wall cracking under pressure. He couldn't deny the numbers. He couldn't deny what every man had seen. And yet he refused to let her stand taller than his SEALs. "Not bad," he said curtly, "but combat isn't tidy like a training course. Real soldiers have to shoot under fire. Chaos. Adrenaline. Uncertainty. That's what separates trained warriors from amateurs." His eyes bored into Eve, daring her to object. Instead she gave a small nod. "Then set it up," she said quietly. "Whatever test you believe is fair." That calm acceptance left Braddock with no escape. He had to raise the stakes, or his men would see his hesitation as surrender. He turned to the operators. "Simulated combat. Drill," he ordered. "Team against one. Moving targets, suppressive fire, everything you've got. Let's see if she still looks calm when it isn't just cardboard standing across from her." The SEALs stirred at the command. Some looked hesitant, others intrigued. It wasn't every day they were ordered to simulate full combat against a civilian, and some worried it might be too much. But the colonel's authority left no room for argument. They geared up quickly, checking mags, loading blanks for safety, but with the same ferocity they'd bring to a real fight. Eve, for her part, adjusted the borrowed rifle strap and slipped on a helmet offered by the range officer. She looked almost ordinary in the gear, ordinary, until her eyes sharpened with a focus that made even the scarred SEAL glance at her twice. The whistle blew. The SEALs fanned out, covering angles, moving with professional synergy. Their suppressive fire rattled across the course, filling the air with deafening cracks. Eve dove into cover, not with panic but with precision, her movements efficient, tactical. She popped up, fired, and one of the operator's sensors buzzed, marking him down. She shifted instantly, rolling to another barricade as rounds pelted the wood above her. Another burst, another operator's vest beeped defeat. The SEALs weren't careless, they were elite, skilled, and coordinated. But she seemed to anticipate them, to read their movements before they committed, cutting through their formation like a blade through cloth. Within minutes, the field went quiet, smoke hanging heavy in the air. Every SEAL lay marked killed. And Eve? She emerged from cover, rifle steady, helmet tilted back slightly, her expression as calm as when she'd first stepped onto the range. The silence afterward was absolute. No laughter. No muttering. Just the sound of men struggling to reconcile what they had witnessed. Braddock's face was thundercloud dark, his authority bleeding away with every second of awe directed toward her. The colonel's pride was bleeding out by the second. His men had fallen, one by one, in a simulation where they usually thrived. Eve's calm precision had shredded their tactics like paper, and worse, she had done it without breaking a sweat. Braddock's jaw clenched so tight it looked as though his teeth might crack. He felt the weight of the men's eyes shifting, not toward him as leader but toward her as something more. Authority didn't exist on paper, it lived in respect, and respect was being siphoned from him with every heartbeat she stood there. He couldn't allow it. Enough games, he barked, his voice louder than necessary. You've proven you can shoot targets and play war with blanks. But this isn't the Olympics. This is the military. Warriors bleed, sweat, and die for their training. So I'll ask again, who trained you? What branch are you from? No one shoots like that without years in the field. His words were harsh, but beneath them lay desperation. Eve remained still. She removed the helmet slowly, set it aside, and brushed a strand of hair back with a calmness that only enraged him further. Does it matter? She asked, her voice soft but firm. You wanted me to shoot. I shot. You wanted me to endure pressure. I did. You wanted me to fight your men. I won. Why does the rest matter? Her eyes locked on him, unblinking, holding his fury without fear. The SEALs shifted uneasily, glancing between their commander and the woman who had dismantled every test laid before her. Ramirez broke the silence first, his voice respectful. Colonel, with all due respect, it matters because if she isn't military, then we've just watched a civilian outshoot and outfight some of the best-trained soldiers in the world. That's not nothing. That's history. His honesty earned nods from a few of the men, though Braddock's glare silenced them quickly. Braddock jabbed a finger in Eve's direction. She's hiding something. No civilian walks in here and humiliates the United States Navy SEALs unless there's a story behind it. And I won't have secrets on my range. He stepped closer, lowering his tone but sharpening it like a knife. You think this is impressive? You think these men should be looking at you with respect? You're nothing until you prove yourself. Name, rank, history. Or you're just a fraud with a lucky streak. His words were poison meant to rattle her, to provoke a crack in the calm facade she wore. But Eve didn't flinch. She leaned on the rifle like it was a cane and regarded him with an expression that carried a strange mixture of patience and disappointment. Colonel, she said quietly, I'm not here to take respect from your men. They've earned theirs through service and sacrifice. I'm here because you mocked me when I asked to try. And I don't tolerate mockery well. Her words weren't arrogant. They were honest, steady, and that made them heavier than a boast. The SEALs could feel the sincerity in them, the lack of ego. Respect bloomed deeper, not because she demanded it but because she seemed to reject it. The scarred SEAL, his name was Harlow, finally spoke up, his gravelly voice carrying more weight than the colonel's booming tone. Sir, he said carefully, maybe we should hear her out. Whoever she is, she's got skill we can't deny. If there's training behind that, maybe it's something we can learn from. Braddock whipped around on him, fury flashing in his eyes. Are you questioning my command, Harlow? The operator didn't blink. No, sir. I'm saying respect isn't a choice, it's earned. And she's earned mine today. The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Other SEALs murmured agreement, some nodding subtly, some openly. Braddock felt the ground slipping beneath him. His own men were fracturing, their loyalty wavering not in defiance but in recognition of merit. To lose them to admiration for this woman was unthinkable. He needed control back, needed a final blow that would shatter the pedestal they were building for her. "All right," he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "One last test. If you pass, I'll consider this circus worthwhile. If you fail, you walk out of here and never set foot on a military range again." His challenge cut through the air, sharp with finality. Eve tilted her head slightly, as though considering. "What's the test?" she asked. Braddock's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man setting a trap. He pointed toward the far edge of the range where steel plates were mounted at nearly impossible distances, 800 meters, 900, and finally 1,000. Few men could hit those targets consistently without specialized sniper rifles. "Long-range precision," he said. 1,000 meters. Standard M4, no sniper scopes, no mods. 3 shots. You hit at least 2, you pass. You miss, you're done." He smirked, certain he'd finally drawn the line between luck and true impossibility. The SEALs murmured uneasily. The M4 wasn't built for 1,000-meter shots. Even their best snipers struggled at that distance with heavier rifles. The challenge was absurd and they knew it. Yet Eve didn't argue. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. 3 shots, she repeated. At 1,000 meters. Very well. Her acceptance silenced the whispers, leaving only the sharp tang of anticipation hanging in the air. She stepped forward, lifted the rifle, and walked toward the long bench at the firing line. The sun caught her figure as she sat, calm as stone, adjusting the iron sights with deliberate precision. Braddock folded his arms, confidence returning as he muttered to himself. "This will end it." Finally. The SEALs gathered behind, half expecting failure, half hoping for another miracle. Eve lay prone on the ground, the rifle steady in her hands, the barrel stretching toward a distant steel plate barely visible to the naked eye. She breathed once, twice, then stilled. The range was silent but for the rustle of wind. Her fingers slid to the trigger. The moment of truth hung heavy, and all eyes were on her. Eve's cheek rested against the stock of the rifle, her body stretched flat across the dirt as though she had done this 1,000 times before. The distant steel plate at 1,000 meters shimmered in the midday heat, barely more than a speck to the naked eye. The M4 in her hands wasn't designed for this. Its effective range fell hundreds of meters short, and the lack of a scope made the task border on madness. Braddock stood with arms folded, certainty etched into every line of his face. To him this wasn't just a test, it was the execution of her myth. He imagined her frustration, the missed shots, the humiliation. He pictured his men laughing again, their loyalty returning. But the men weren't laughing now. They leaned forward, tense and silent, as though they knew instinctively this moment mattered more than the colonel's ego. Eve inhaled slowly, deeply, drawing air into her lungs and letting it trickle back out. Her eyes narrowed, not with strain but with focus. She wasn't guessing, she was calculating. Distance. When. Drop. She tilted the rifle ever so slightly, compensating for the fall of the round over the vast stretch. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, waiting, patient. Then came the crack. The recoil pushed back into her shoulder, and the round screamed down range. For a full second, nothing. Then, clang. The steel plate sang with the unmistakable ring of impact. The men behind her gasped, a collective exhale of disbelief. 1,000 meters with an M4, no optics, and she had struck it clean. Braddock stiffened, his jaw tightening, but he forced composure. "Beginner's luck," he growled, though the words tasted like ash. "She has 2 more." Eve remained silent. She chambered the next round, her movements smooth, efficient. Again she settled into position, eyes calm, breathing steady. Crack. The shot echoed, slicing the air. A second later, clang. Another strike. This one not on the edge, not by chance, but solid and centered enough that even the most skeptical could not deny it. A murmur rippled through the SEALs. Ramirez shook his head slowly, a grin spreading despite himself. "That's not luck," he whispered. Braddock's composure faltered. He could feel his men watching not him, but her. Their admiration was unspoken, but it radiated in the way they leaned toward her, in the way their eyes lit with respect. He snapped his gaze to the distant plate, willing it to remain untouched on the final round. "The last shot," he barked, his voice harsh though it quivered at the edges. "No one makes 3 in a row." His words tried to mask his fear, but everyone heard the strain. Eve prepared the final shot with the same unshakable calm as the first 2. She did not rush, did not hesitate. She breathed, aligned, adjusted. Crack. The shot tore from the barrel, racing across the expanse. The silence stretched longer this time, every man holding his breath as though their collective will could change the outcome. Then it came, the deep, resonant clang that carried across the range like the toll of a bell. 3 for 3. Impossible. Perfect. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was reverence. The SEALs erupted, not in jeers or disbelief, but in spontaneous applause. A few whooped, some slapped each other's shoulders, others just shook their heads with wide grins. Ramirez whistled long and low, muttering, "I've seen miracles, but damn if that isn't one of them." Harlow, the scarred operator, looked at Eve like he was staring at a legend born before his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low with awe. But Eve only rose from the ground, brushing the dirt from her jacket, her face composed, humble. "No one important," she said softly. Braddock's face burned red, not just from anger but from humiliation. His carefully constructed authority, his pride in the superiority of his men, had been gutted in front of them all. "Enough," he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip, desperate to reclaim control. "This is a military facility, not a circus. You've made your point, but skill without loyalty, without discipline means nothing. You think hitting plates makes you a soldier? It doesn't." His words, meant to sound commanding, fell hollow against the silence. The men weren't looking at him. They were still watching her. Eve tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. "Colonel, you're right," she said. "Shooting plates doesn't make a soldier. Discipline, sacrifice, brotherhood, that's what makes these men who they are. I respect that. More than you know." She let her gaze move across the SEALs and they felt it, genuine respect, the kind that couldn't be faked. Her tone softened. "But don't confuse humility with weakness. Some of us carry skills we never brag about. Sometimes the quiet ones have lived more battles than they speak of." Her words sank into the men like stones dropped in water, rippling outward. The colonel, however, could not stand it. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "You will tell me your history," he hissed. "You will tell me now. No more riddles. No more games. Who trained you? Where? What authority gave you the right to walk onto my range and show up my men?" His voice cracked with rage, but his demand was more than curiosity, it was a plea for something he could use to reassert control. Eve met his fury with the same calm she'd held from the beginning. Her voice was low, but every man heard it. "Colonel, some truths aren't owed. But if you must know, let's just say there are places in the world where training never stops, where life itself demands precision every day. I've lived there. Survived there. And unlike medals, survival doesn't shine on your chest. It just stays here." She tapped her temple lightly, then lowered her hand. Her meaning was clear. She carried no rank, no title, no proof, only the scars of survival. Braddock's fury was a living thing now, thrumming beneath his skin. He felt it in the heat of his neck, in the twitch of his jaw, in the way his fists clenched involuntarily. For decades, he had been the immovable wall, the authority no one dared question. Yet here stood a woman without a uniform, without rank, dismantling his pride piece by piece with nothing but calm precision. His men were slipping through his fingers, their respect migrating toward her like iron drawn to a magnet. It was intolerable. "Survival?" he spat, his voice harsh and brittle. "That's your answer? Vague stories and riddles? That's not training, that's not service, that's an excuse. These men bleed for their country. They fight for something bigger than themselves. You think survival makes you their equal? It makes you nothing but a drifter with a gun." His words were venom, but deep down he feared their hollowness. He feared his men saw through them. Eve studied him for a moment, her eyes cool and unblinking. "Colonel," she said softly, "I never claimed to be their equal. I claimed only that I could shoot when you doubted me. Nothing more. The rest," she paused, letting her words sink. "The rest I don't need. To prove to you." Her tone wasn't defiant. It was steady, almost weary, as though she had fought this battle of pride before and found it meaningless. The SEALs shifted uneasily, sensing the tension climbing toward something that couldn't be undone. Ramirez broke the silence, his voice tentative. "Sir, with respect, maybe she doesn't need to prove anything. We've all seen it. Skill like that doesn't come from nowhere. If she says survival, then maybe that's all the answer we need." His words were measured, but they carried weight. Braddock's glare snapped to him, but Ramirez didn't back down. The colonel's voice dropped to a growl. "Do you realize what you're saying, Ramirez? You're siding with her. A civilian. Against your commander." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. But Harlow stepped forward now, scar catching the light, his voice gravelly but steady. "No, sir. We're not siding against you. We're siding with what's real. And right now what's real is that she just outshot us all. Pretending otherwise doesn't change it. The other SEALs murmured agreement, their voices low but unanimous enough to sting Braddock like a whip. Authority was slipping from him in plain sight. Braddock's breathing quickened. He wasn't used to losing ground, wasn't used to being challenged. His desperation birthed a dangerous idea. Fine, he snapped. If survival's her story, let's see how she handles survival under real stress. He turned sharply to the range officer. Bring out the live-fire simulator. A ripple of unease moved through the SEALs. The simulator was no training toy, it was a brutal gauntlet of moving steel, reactive targets, sound blasts, and timed detonations designed to mimic combat chaos. Operators used it sparingly, and even then it pushed them to their limits. To throw a civilian into it was borderline reckless. Sir, Ramirez interjected, alarmed, the simulator's dangerous even for us. Braddock cut him off with a bark. That's the point. If she wants to parade skill, let her prove it in fire and thunder, not neat little bullseyes. Otherwise this charade ends now. His voice cracked with the brittle edge of a man clinging to power. The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared defy a direct order. They moved to ready the simulator, though their reluctance was plain. Eve watched them quietly, then looked back at Braddock. You don't want proof, she said softly. You want me broken. Her words struck him harder than a bullet, though he masked it with a sneer. Call it what you want, he snapped. Step into the box or step off my range. His ultimatum hung in the air like a blade. For a moment, silence ruled. Then Eve nodded. Very well. She walked calmly toward the simulator, her boots crunching gravel, her posture relaxed but purposeful. The SEALs followed, uneasy but compelled, their respect for her only deepening. The simulator roared to life. Metal panels clanged into place, sirens wailed, and mechanical targets shifted unpredictably along tracks. Smoke canisters hissed, filling the enclosure with haze. Explosive charges rattled the ground, simulating nearby detonations. It was chaos by design, a crucible meant to break even trained warriors. Eve stepped inside, adjusted her rifle, and gave a single nod to the operator. The buzzer shrieked. She moved instantly, weaving between obstacles, dropping targets with precision even as the floor shook with simulated blasts. Sirens blared, lights flashed, but her composure never wavered. A moving steel target zipped across her path, cracked down. Two more popped up behind smoke, crack, both fell. She dove into cover just as a time charge boomed, dust showering around her, then rolled forward fluidly to engage the next set. Her rhythm was unbroken, her calm eerie. Even under the thunder of chaos, she seemed almost serene, as if the world had slowed to her pace. Outside the enclosure, the SEALs watched in stunned silence. They had sweated, cursed, and stumbled their way through this gauntlet. But Eve? She flowed through it with terrifying grace. Ramirez muttered under his breath, "She's done this before, no doubt about it." Harlow nodded grimly. Not just done it. Survived it. His words carried the weight of realization, and slowly the others began to understand. Whoever Eve was, she wasn't just skilled. She was forged in fire none of them could see. When the final buzzer sounded, the simulator powered down. Every target had been hit. Every obstacle cleared. Eve stepped out of the haze, her face calm, unmarked by strain. The SEALs erupted into quiet murmurs of disbelief and admiration. Braddock, however, stood rigid, his face pale beneath his rage. He had thrown everything at her. Obstacles, chaos, humiliation, and she had emerged untouchable. For the first time in years, Colonel Braddock felt small. The silence that followed Eve's performance was heavier than any explosion. Smoke from the simulator drifted in the air, carrying the acrid tang of cordite and burnt powder. The SEALs stood rooted, staring at her as though they'd just witnessed a ghost step out of fire. Even Ramirez, steady and level-headed, had no words. Eve simply lowered her rifle, engaged the safety, and rested it lightly against her thigh. Her breathing was calm, unhurried, as if she had been walking through a garden rather than chaos engineered to rattle even the best. Braddock felt a hollowness inside his chest that terrified him more than her performance. For years, he had ruled by the certainty of his superiority, the unwavering knowledge that no man under his command could match him. But this woman, who wasn't supposed to belong here, had reduced his authority to dust in front of his own men. Rage flared, but beneath it, something worse, fear. Fear of the unknown in her. "Where did you learn that?" he demanded, his voice sharp, cracking slightly at the edges. Eve met his eyes without blinking. "I told you," she said evenly. "Survival." Braddock's jaw tightened. "Don't you lie to me. No one moves like that without training. No one clears the simulator cold." That's not survival, that's military. Spec Ops. Classified level training. Who are you really? His voice rose, echoing across the range. His men had never heard him sound like that, less a commander, more a desperate man clawing for answers. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed Eve's face. Not pride. Not defiance. Sadness. She exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping for a moment before returning to him. Who I was doesn't matter, she said softly. Who I am now does. And who I am now is someone who survived. That answer, calm but evasive, only stoked the fire. Braddock stepped closer, his face inches from hers. That's not good enough. You think you can waltz in here, humiliate my men, humiliate me, and then hide behind half answers? You owe us the truth. His breath was hot with fury, but Eve didn't flinch. It was Ramirez who broke the tension, his voice firm but respectful. Sir, maybe she doesn't owe us anything. She's not under your command. She came here because you challenged her. And she proved herself. That should be enough. Braddock wheeled on him, eyes blazing. Enough? You think this is enough? This display undermines everything we stand for. Respect. Order. Chain of command. If a civilian can walk in and outshoot Navy SEALs, what does that say about us? It says the world's bigger than we think, Harlow said quietly. His scar twisted as his jaw tightened. Sir, with all due respect, she's not here to mock us. She's here to survive, just like she said. That's not weakness. That's strength. The others murmured agreement, some louder than others, and Braddock felt the ground crumbling beneath him. His men were slipping away, their loyalty bending toward the woman who had just done the impossible. He couldn't allow it. His voice dropped to a low growl. You all want to follow her? Fine. But don't come crying to me when this fantasy falls apart. She's hiding something and I'll find it out. Eve's eyes softened then, and she spoke not with defiance, but with a quiet weight that silenced even the buzzing lights above. You already know, she said. You've seen enough soldiers to recognize one. You just don't want to admit it. Her words pierced the colonel deeper than any bullet. Memories stirred in him, long nights reading classified reports, rumors of ghost operatives who vanished off the grid, whispers of black projects the Pentagon denied. Was she one of them? The thought gnawed at him, because if she was, then he had picked a fight with someone who lived in shadows far darker than his own world of command and discipline. The SEALs, too, began to connect the dots. Ramirez spoke softly, almost as if voicing a secret. You were in the game, weren't you? Not regular service. Something deeper. Eve didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. Harlow nodded grimly. That explains it. The calm. The way you move. The way you breathe in the chaos. That doesn't come from boot camp or a couple of deployments. That comes from years of living missions no one admits exist. His tone carried no accusation, only recognition. Braddock, however, couldn't stand it. Classified or not, you're still nobody here. You think being a ghost makes you untouchable? It doesn't. Out there maybe you survived. But in my house, on my range, you answered to me. Eve finally smiled faintly, though it wasn't warm. Colonel, with respect, survival doesn't care about houses or ranges. It doesn't care about rank. It doesn't care about pride. It only cares whether you're alive at the end of the day. And on that field, I've outlived men twice your pride and half your mercy. Her words silenced the field like a shroud. Even Braddock, for all his fury, had no immediate retort. Because beneath her calm, there was truth, and it terrified him. Ramirez straightened, his voice carrying with quiet authority. Sir, whatever her past is, I think we all see one thing clear. She's not here to tear us down. She's here because she already walked through fire we can't imagine. That deserves respect, whether we understand it or not. The SEALs nodded, one by one, their loyalty shifting before Braddock's eyes. He saw it, felt it, and it burned him worse than any wound. His command, his control was slipping. He wasn't just fighting Eve anymore. He was fighting the truth she embodied, that respect was earned, not demanded, and she had earned it in ways his pride couldn't match. Braddock's voice was low when he finally spoke, but the bitterness dripped like poison. This isn't over. He turned sharply and strode off the range, leaving silence in his wake. The men looked at Eve. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She only lowered her gaze as though she carried a weight heavier than victory. For the first time the SEALs understood. This woman wasn't just a shooter. She was a survivor of battles too dark to name. And though she had won today, the real fight was only beginning. The end.